you so much for coming tonight. I know there are several Ukrainian or Ukraine-related events happening tonight, so we're really honored to have such a good audience. We're going to discuss a really important topic of Russia's genocidal war in Ukraine and the impact it has on children and young people specifically. My name is Olga Tymchenko. I'm the director of the Ukrainian Institute London, for those of you who don't know me. And I will introduce just one of the panel of speakers, and then the speaker I will introduce the rest of the speakers, and we'll start a discussion. But before we begin the discussion, we'll also be watching a very short documentary film. So let me introduce Kateryna Ryabiko, who in 2023 joined OPORA in Poland Foundation as advisor on development and strategies, and as a board member of the Agency for Legislative Initiatives. Until recently, Kateryna was the first deputy director of the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights of the OSCE. She is a co-founder of a group of companies promoting Ukrainian innovations and the concept of diplomacy through technology. She also has worked at USAID, Freedom House, the National Democratic Institute of International Affairs, and other public and private organizations. And I have to also stress that the speakers, all of them, have been on a bit of a tour of the UK and London, having spoken to the British Parliament on Monday and yesterday. And this is their last event of the tour. They're heading back to Ukraine tomorrow, so we're really honored to have them. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. It's really a pleasure for us to be here. And it was such a formal introduction, Pani Olesa. However, we're really hoping for an informal event. We're really hoping for an informal and engaging discussion, as we know that we're here as a community. Yes, we're not going to talk about easy topics. We're going to talk about something that is heartbreaking, and it's very sad. And probably if we had a choice, we wouldn't be here, right? And we wouldn't be talking about that, and we all wish that there would be no war in Ukraine. However, the reality is different, and therefore we're here as a partnership. Two organizations that put their hats and activities together. One is the civil network OPORA and OPORA in Poland Foundation, that for 2 years after the beginning of the full-scale invasion opened the Center for Documentation of War Crimes. OPORA became one of the first Ukrainian NGOs who started to collect testimonies from witnesses of war crimes outside of Ukraine. Now Poland is hosting 1.2 million refugees. To date, OPORA conducted 1,600 interviews with all of the data transferred to the Prosecutor General of Poland and Ukraine. What's very important, and what we heard here from the partners in the UK, is that this partnership between the law enforcement and civil society is essential to ensure that the justice is served. And today we have two children in the audience. They will not speak, but they're here, and I really would like to acknowledge them. It's Oleg and Veronika, and they're here brought by another NGO, our partner, the Voices of Children Foundation. They've been working with these children. They are the witnesses. They've been the witnesses of the war crimes conducted by the Russian Federation on the territory of Ukraine. Oleg is from Mariupol, and he's been there for 7 months for 2 months during the occupation. And Veronika is from Kherson. She lived in the occupation for 7 months before her family managed to escape from Kherson. So about that we're going to talk, and we're going to talk also about the important work that the Voices of Children Foundation is conducting in Ukraine, working with many children like Oleg and Veronika to provide the psychological support to them, to actually help them to overcome the trauma of occupation, of going through filtration, of being displaced, and we can continue. All of these factors, something that we read in the newspapers about the forced displacement of children, about the numbers of children that being moved to Russia, that are going through filtration, those that were returned, these are not only numbers, these are crimes. These are war crimes conducted by the Russian Federation in Ukraine. And that's why we're here, because we want the voices of civil society, the voices of witnesses, the voices of children to be heard, as I think that we can all agree here as a community that the ramifications of the war in Ukraine are already far beyond the borders of the country. It impacts the lives of people abroad. It affects every person who is sitting here in this audience. It impacts children, and for Ukraine, we're talking about the generations. If I take Oleg as an example, he always lived on the front lines. Since 2014, he lived on the front lines. He was 7, now he's 17. For 10 years, this boy has been living on the front lines, experiencing shelling, seeing the torture, being a witness of war crimes. And there are thousands and thousands of children like Oleg and Veronika whose lives have been impacted. And what we are doing together as OPORA and the voices of children, and specifically with the Center for Documentation of War Crimes in Poland, we want justice to be served, and we want accountability not to be accountability of Russia for the war crimes that are being conducted, not just a word, not just a subject of a political dialogue, but a reality for victims and survivors of these crimes. And to kick us off with the further discussions, because we also want to talk about other aspects. We're going to talk today a little bit about culture and erasure of identity. We will touch upon an education. We will also talk a little bit about the efforts of our efforts in particular, of how we really trying step by step bring this justice closer to the victims. And I have the pleasure to introduce all of the participants and the speakers tonight. And I will start with Iryna Shvets. Iryna is the director of OPORA in Poland. Olga Aivazovska, who is the head of board of Civil Network OPORA, and we have Olga Tymchenko from the Voices of Children Foundation. And I already introduced our young participants who are here in the audience, and I really, really think that it's very important to acknowledge that. So, the war goes on, the children are growing up, and we have Ola here, and maybe Ola can tell us how your work is trying to make the life of children from the front lines a little bit safer, a little bit calmer, and a little bit more normal.
Yes, thank you. Not only on the front lines, because all children in Ukraine are children that are living in a war, and everyone has this trauma of war. And now you saw this film. It was made by children together with our charitable foundation, Voices of Children. It was 2 months course about script writing course together with known Ukrainian director and screenwriter Marisa Nikityuk, if you know her. They meet online with children more than 2 months and learned how to tell their stories through the visual symbols and through the media. And our psychologist also worked with them all this time, and this psychologist helped them to reflect after each session. And in the end of this course, children went to Carpathian for 3 days, and they made this film with Marisa during 3 days. They all these symbols were created by the children themselves, and this beautiful film they made only for 3 days. And this activity is very important for children who have lost their usual environment because of the COVID, because of war. And during this course, they found a community of friends and lived their stories through with psychological assistance. They saw that they can create art, can support each other and be strong together. It's about their resilience, and it's about our Ukrainian resilience. When we presented this film together with the children in Kyiv, there were a lot of journalists, and children told about this film themselves, and the audience was really touched. all these children are still friends and support each other. Now we send this film to different festivals, international festivals, and we are waiting for the victory. We also created the book War Through the Voices of Children. This is book includes 100 quotes of children. You can see these pictures. These pictures made known artists and photographers all over the world. And now we made a deal with the famous American publisher HarperCollins, yeah, and this book will, you can buy this book everywhere, and all funds directed to psychological assistance for the children. Our charitable foundation, Voices of Children, has been helping children affected by the war since 2014. After full-scale invasion, we have helped more than 83,000 children and families. This is, first of all, humanitarian aid, psychological support, and rehabilitation aid. Today we have 16 branches in different parts of Ukraine. We work in Zaporizhia, Mykolaiv, Kharkiv, Chernigiv region, and also on the front line. Our mobile teams with psychologists also work in deoccupied cities and villages. Every month, 1,000 children receive psychological support in our branches. Now we have started building a rehabilitation center near the Kyiv for children and families. We have already bought the land and developed an architectural project, and children participated in the creation of this project, and we accepted their wishes. We understand that the need of psychological rehabilitation will be relevant for many years in Ukraine. That's why we are building this rehabilitation center, and we are looking for the best specialists. If you want to join our course and donate, you can see a QR code there and make your donation. If you know Ukrainians, parents and children who need psychological support abroad, we have a chat board. You can find it to our site, in our site, and please share with them our contacts, because we have a lot requests from Ukrainians that live abroad. So please contact us, share our contacts, and do everything that you can for the victory of Ukraine. And sorry, my English.
I think that we can all agree that we shall stand in solidarity with Ukrainian children and with everyone affected by war. It is through the eyes that we see how the lives are affected, how the communities are affected, and it goes beyond and above just the borders of Ukraine. And I think that the storytelling has become very, very effective in bringing the stories of Ukrainian children closer to the people outside of Ukraine. And here, I really, when Olga was speaking, I recalled how I worked with the family from Mykolaiv Oblast region, a woman who came together with her 3 sons to Poland, to Warsaw. And I just got a phone call from the hotline and said, like, well, can you place them? Because they don't know anything. They traveled for 40 hours through Romania by bus and changed, and then the trains, and they're really lost. They don't speak any foreign languages. They came to a foreign country and they need support. And I just I just went by car, picked them up at the bus station. We went to the hotel, we spoke, we talked about the needs and started looking for a placement. And she had a boy who was 10 years old or 11 years old, and he was just very, very quiet. And I asked him, like, if he wants anything, if there is anything that I can help him with. And he just said that I'm so surprised that you're so kind, and that I met kind people, because what I've seen lately was far, 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 far away from kindness. And sometimes this simple things that we can do as communities, as human beings, really matter a lot. So when he left Warsaw, all of them, they lived in a house. They wanted to live on the border with Ukraine because it was closer to home, they said. They didn't want to stay in Warsaw. They really moved to the border because they said, like, whenever the opportunity will arise, we will move back home to our village. And for me, it was a big experience for my family as well, because I asked my children to say, okay, well, let's find the clothes, let's put whatever is needed for them for the first month of their life abroad, because they need to be comfortable. But what else this boy told me is that I asked him, like, okay, well, what can I do? What else can I do for you? He said, I don't know, it's not home. And what I felt is that he's not only missing his land, he's not only missing his home, his friends, but really this comfort of identity, of culture, and something that many people in Ukraine, especially those who've experienced the occupation, felt was being taken from them by force. And that issue has become one of the elements that can prove the genocidal nature of this war. And it's a policy issue. And that's something that in the meetings that we've had with the government officials we've raised, and OPORA particularly looked at to show the correlation and to really convince the audiences abroad that this war is genocidal. I want to give the floor to Iryna Shvets, who will share more from the research and the evidence collected by OPORA, specifically on the aspects related to culture.
Yes. Thank you, Katya, for this introduction. And really, the kids, the children, the education is being a huge part of these cultural practices, you know, that Russia is now exercising when committing this genocidal war in Ukraine. But what I want to start with and to highlight is that, you know, like, we all have to understand that Russia is being very methodic and has been already very experienced in erasing Ukrainian identity, in erasing Ukrainian culture, erasing scientific achievements made by Ukrainians, you know, also erasing our historical memory. And this is what we have witnessed on the occupied territories for the last 10 years. But this is also the thing that we have witnessed for many years and centuries done by the Soviet Union and also by the Russian Empire, is that they wanted to make Ukrainian resilience less. And this is exactly what we have witnessed on the so-called old occupied territories, Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast. The research that is actually now being presented in Kyiv by my OPORA colleagues is mainly focused on the cultural practices that Russia has been exercised. So basically what we did is that we analyzed social media accounts of so-called Donetsk and Luhansk Republic, their so-called ministries of cultural affairs, to see how they use these cultural practices to erase the national identity of Ukrainians, with a special focus on education, with a special focus on keeping Ukrainian kids away from Ukrainian culture, making them and putting them into Russian identity. So now we are very clear when we are speaking about this genocidal dimension of the war, as Katya also mentioned it, because what Russians are doing is they putting this joint cultural space, joint educational space on both the occupied territories and also in Russia. So they want to get those territories more closer and closer to the Russian culture. And I will just give a very short timeline of how it was done on the old occupied territories of Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast for you to understand that now Russia is being way faster to introduce those cultural practices on the newly occupied territories. And yesterday we also heard from Veronica her experience of living under occupation when in Kherson particularly the schooling system was turned into Russia, and that Ukrainian was forbidden there, and teachers were forced and they were made to teach Russian, and all the schooling system was kind of turned into Russian schooling system. And this is exactly what we witnessed on the Donetsk and Luhansk temporarily occupied territories. So basically it all started 10 years ago, 2014, when all this institutionalization just started, and the ministries of cultural affairs of so-called Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast were established. So it all started, with a kind of, we call it a soft power, when some humanitarian aid was provided by the occupiers, when popular Russian artists came to these occupied territories to provide some performances, to become closer to those, as they call them, Donbas people. And schools at that time were also starting to operate within this Russian curriculum. In 2015, the Russian occupier, they already introduced a so-called patriotic education for kids in schools. So they were educated them in Russian history, in Russian literature, in Russian language, because all of this schooling was turned into that system. 2016 was proclaimed as a year of reading. And this is exactly the year where all Ukrainian books, they were just taken away from the libraries on the occupied territories, and they were substituted with classical Russian literature. And of course, all the civilians and all the children were made to read them. 2018 was a year of Russian history. Just to make sure that Donbas people are fully attached to the Russian, to the history of Russian Empire, and understand and comprehend themselves as being a part of a huge Russian nation. 2019, the year of Russian language. And of course, this is a proclamation that Russian language is the only language that might be used in the occupied territories. This is exactly when the shift from the so-called local Donbas identity that were formed during those 5 years took place, and it shifted into the Russian identity. So at the very beginning, for Russian occupiers, it was very it was important for them to create the notion of local identity, to say that those Ukrainians staying at the Donetsk and Luhansk occupied territories are not Ukrainians anymore, because there is no such identity as Ukrainian. Is a kind of distorted image of the Russian identity. So they started to call them Donbas people, and to create this notion of Donbas identity, local ones. But then in 2020, so particularly, they become to speak, occupiers started to speak about the Russian identity. So they erase again those local identity and shifted it into Russian ones. That year, they also drafted the Russian Donbas Doctrine, and I just want to mention 2 key points and have 2 quotations on that, because the main tasks of those doctrine was to promote historical justice and strengthen Donetsk and Luhansk republics as a part of Russia. And the second one was to help Russian-speaking Ukrainians return to their real identity, of course, meaning Russian ones. And this doctrine concluded that people of Donbas are linked with the history of Russia and its historical part of Novorossiya. So basically, we can witness this shift, of how the Ukrainian identity being totally erased on the occupied territories. And now this is exactly what Russian occupiers are doing on the newly occupied territories, but way faster. So now schools on the occupied territories, they are fully under the Russian curriculum. They have children studying there. They have some extra classes in patriotic education. They have military education. They have the movement called Youth Army that was established by Shoigu in 2016. And the main aim of this Youth Army movement is to make sure that Ukrainian children on the occupied territories get very good military education for kids starting from 8 and older. And after several years, of course, they will be able to join the Russian army to fight against their motherland, to fight against Ukrainians. So now, having all this in mind, I think that we are really need to think about how we can have all those children back to the Ukrainian identity. And this is an open question. When Ukraine succeeds in victory, what the state policy should look like to make sure that we just don't lose those kids and to make sure that the war would not have that awful impact on the future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Iryna. In the fire of the total destruction, culture becomes a beacon of hope for many, and also demonstration of will to protect the nation for the future generations. And this is what I think that we need to talk about, hope and action. And here, what comes to mind, Olga, is the efforts on accountability and justice for the millions of Ukrainians, and Ukrainian children in particular. Justice that must be served as soon as possible, specifically for the future generations, because here, just yesterday we had a debate. What is more important for Ukrainian children, to be returned home or for the Russian leadership to be accountable for what they've done to the Ukrainian children? And here, I think that the clear answer is that both. And here the time is of essence, because we are speaking about the future. We're speaking about the future of the nation, of Ukrainian nation. Olga has personally done a lot to ensure that Russian leadership is held accountable. And I really would like you to share some of the key observations and some of the key calls to action, if you wish, so that we can all, as a community, do to make it a reality for the victims.
Good evening, and thank you, Kateryna, for introductory remarks. They were very deep and, effective, I hope, for the audience to understand what we have speak about. First of all, it's about new generations, it's about peace, it's about justice, and it's about sustainable peace. Ukrainian civil society was always active, for sure. We have very well developed NGOs in Ukraine, and now it looks like we became, geopolitically active, because without building the trust, bridges between different stakeholders, societies, and partners, there is no any option how to win the war. But this war is not just about Ukraine. 2 years ago, nobody accepted that Ukraine will survive. 1 year ago, not so many partners accepted that it's not just war in Ukraine. A few days ago in Munich, on the field of Munich Security Conference, which I visited too, I heard many times on closed dinners, closed meetings, and open remarks that it's European war. And Russia will not finish on Ukraine. Russia will continue to be aggressive because its own regime doesn't want to stop their candidacy in office. So Putin and his close circle wants to be in charge for decades. And when Putin will not survive, because each of the person has its own schedule for life, we believe that KGB will continue to lead in this state. And there is only one option to end the war, to build sustainable peace framework for Europe. Ukraine is not very strong now, and it's a question how much support we will have during next weeks and months. I'm speaking about military aid, I'm speaking about financial aid for Ukraine, and I'm speaking about how to help Ukraine to survive and how to help Ukraine to protect civilian infrastructure, cities, and first of all to protect Ukrainian nation from huge migration. We read a few days ago on Facebook of your Minister of Foreign Affairs that there are 3 priorities, top priorities for FCDO. First of all, it's to help Ukraine. The second one is to fight against illegal migration. But migration crisis is what Russia is using against nations, not only in Ukraine, in the US, in Europe, everywhere, because Russia knows weaknesses and knows weak sides of those states which trying to live according to rule of law with its own legislation and so on and so forth. And if Ukraine will not be protected, you will have 20 million of refugees. I'm not speaking about UK, I'm speaking about Europe and other countries. But what I have to highlight, Ukrainians do not want to live abroad. It's such circumstances which is happening because Russia invaded Ukraine. And OPORA and my colleagues analyzed migration waves and causation and correlation between different activities of Russia and then what is happening abroad. I have to share with you just few data. During 4 months in 2022, after 1st of October until the end of March, Russia used 700 missiles and 400 drones against energy system and critical infrastructure in Ukraine. Ukraine is a country which has its own climate, and unfortunately it can be minus 15 by Celsius in winter. People can't live in the big cities without heating system, without water supply, without energy system, without internet, without mobile phones. My sister gave a birth to her son October 30th without energy. So, and he had surgery without energy, without light. And this is awful. Do not know what is happening with her during 50 hours because she was in medical institution and we didn't have mobile connection with her and with her doctor. We didn't know what is happening with her at all. And during last winter, we lost irreversibly 1.8 million of Ukrainians. We already do not have 4 million of Ukrainians for recover and rebuild the country after the end of the war, even according to the current damage for Ukrainian cities, infrastructure, and so on and so forth. And we don't know when the war will end. At the same time, I have to compare this statistical base with another. During 5 weeks in last May and half of June, Russians targeted Kyiv, capital of Ukraine, each day. People couldn't sleep. They had a huge damage for their mental health because you can't be effective if you can't sleep during days. But we didn't lose the people. So they didn't cross the borders. They just left the city for a week, 5 days, 7 days, for having sleep. in other cities close to this territory. Why it's happened? Because we didn't have blackouts, and we had effective anti-air defense system with Patriots, with missiles, with protection of civilians in the biggest city of Ukraine. Just compare these 4 months with unpredictability of your daily base needs and life, with blackouts and unpredictability of security for you and for your families. And May, when everything was predictable, each of the citizens knew what to do when they heard alarm, waiting for hours and back to their homes and continue their duties. Drink a coffee, have, have the schools, or continue their business life. So let's talk honestly. Ukraine has to be protected, and if the security circumstances will be predictable in Ukraine, we will save the people. These people will not cross the borders, and we will have enough human capital for resilience. What spokesperson of Putin said, Peskov, that if Ukrainian authorities will accept the request from Russia, Ukrainian nation will not be suffering. So it was about energy system. They use, they violate the rules of war just for having better circumstances to win in a war, to win the war in Ukraine. But what is the problematic side? That now we are living in between the huge and very important decision, in between the decision who will help Ukraine to have enough equipment, military equipment, to protect civilians and to defend the territories, to be as strong as it possible on the front line. Now Russia started counter-offensive attack on the on 5 points, and this is crucial to have military aid as soon as it possible. Without this support, we will have missiles and protection for cities just for 30 days. Let's start counting these days now. If US Congress will not back to the root, will not continue support security in Europe, or we have to understand how to help ourselves in Europe without this partnership. So I'm strongly asking you to think globally how all of us can build communities for having negotiations or conversations with the politicians on the field, with the media, with the societies, because sometimes we have a new pulse in Europe that European nations are so tired because of war in Ukraine. I can't react normally to this message because when I've been here, my son is in Kyiv and it's under the attack, and I can't sleep from abroad just because I have to know what is happening with him when he is sitting on the bathroom, because you can't visit a shelter each day, each night, because it's impossible to survive mentally on such circumstances. So I will see him on Sunday, and I believe everything will be good. But what I'm calling about practically, we visited during these days your MPs, your ministers. We had a meeting today with Minister of Security, and we have to build sustainable peace. It's not about daily base fight for having enough missiles for anti-air defense system. It's about long-term process with two very important parts. First of all, it's about security. The second one, it's about justice, because war will back to Europe if Russia will not be punished. And my last point, that Russia has to pay. Russian money has to work for having protection of Ukrainian cities. So there is a frozen assets for more than $300 billion. Russia destroyed the infrastructure in Ukraine during first year of aggression for more than $400 billion. You have here money of Abramovich and other oligarchs. We have to find legal solution, but we have to be enough creative to work not just hard, but effective in very short period, because then it will be too late. So my last point, Russia has to pay for the war in Ukraine now, because we need this money for having military aid and protection. But justice is very important point for sustainable peace. Without that, war will back to Ukraine. And Ukrainian nation will suffer, and not only Ukrainian nation. Trust me that, not just me, but you have to know that so many analytical center think tanks produced many their scenarios, built materials about potential aggression against NATO. Very soon, maybe it will happen in 3 years or 5 years or 7 years, it doesn't matter. So you will pay more if Russia will invade one of the NATO country. So that's why justice is important, but military aid today is important for surviving and for continuing to defend the country. When aggression happened, we had the meetings, me and my colleagues in Poland, with many high-level politicians from Europe and USA, because they visited, territories close to the Polish-Ukrainian border to have meetings with many Ukrainians. And what I heard from them, we are on your side, but nothing will help you. It's about 72 hours, it's about 1 or 2 weeks, and nothing can protect Ukraine. But you see, something is happening, because impossible is possible, and we have to be creative to continue work with our politicians, with our societies, with our partners, to have sustainable support of Ukraine, because it's about Europe, not just about us.
Thank you, Olga. And here, honestly, a quote by former President Ronald Reagan comes to mind. And I will just read it to ensure that I don't lose any essence of it. It is up to us in our time to choose, and choose wisely, between the hard but necessary task of preserving freedom and the temptation to ignore our duty and blindly hope for the best, while the enemies of freedom grow stronger day by day. With this quote, I really would like to open the floor for the discussion and dialogue, so that we can collectively, as a community, and openly and honestly discuss what can we do so that the enemy of freedom doesn't grow stronger. Please, the floor is open.
Begin. Nobody else is here. All right. Well, why don't I start while everybody else is thinking? I have 2 questions. The first one is to Olga. It's about ICC's decision to issue an arrest warrant to Putin. Ukrainians received it mostly with a lot of joy, obviously, because it's some, kind of potential for justice, at least in the future, to be done. But there's also a theory that ICC sent a signal to Russia, to the Kremlin, saying, okay, this is the sort of war crime we can prove, abduction of children, and we don't have enough proof for other war crimes to issue arrest warrant based on that. What's your view of that analysis? Also, is it making your work, is it aiding your work, the ruling, the warrant, the issuing of the warrant? And the second question is to any of you who wants to take it. I often find myself in situations where people try to persuade me that, the Russians in Russia, or indeed outside of Russia, are uncomfortable about showing their true opinions and so on. We don't need to go into that. But the one thing I do say to them, those who wish to help, for instance, can locate Ukrainian abducted children and help them escape Russia and be brought back to Ukraine. My understanding is that there are such initiatives inside Russia. Are you in touch with them without revealing too much? And can you say a little bit about that sort of work?
First of all, ICC has complementary jurisdiction. So not for lawyers, it's very boring, but it means that everything on Ukrainian side. When we are speaking about 110,000 of criminal cases opened by Ukrainian prosecutor office, it means that everything everything on Ukrainian side, because none of the complementary jurisdiction will have capacity to investigate when we are speaking about so big amount of cases. So ICC is crucially important on international level for sure, but I disagree that that it means that ICC will not have opportunity to look on another cases or another type of strategic cases, because as I know there is one of potential. It's about Kakhovka Dam, because when Russia destroyed Kakhovka, it was a part of huge ecological damage for Ukrainian territories, and not just for Ukrainian, but for neighbors too, in Romania, for example, or Bulgaria and others. So it was problematic for sure. ICC is fighting for their visibility for sure, for their influential role, because that there are so many political issues across the establishment of ICC, and many countries, not many, but few very powerful countries, didn't accept Rome Statute, and it's not just about Russia or China, it's about USA too. So if ICC will win the case, it means if ICC will investigate and adopt the decision at the end, so ICC will be powerful. Justice on the global level will be powerful. If ICC will lose this chance, global justice will not happen for many others, not just for Europe or for Ukraine. That's why it's on their side. They have to fight for their capacity for win this global story. But UK is very active on the track of supporting Ukraine in justice. So first of all, UK is supporting training for judges, for investigators, for prosecutors, for helping with equipment, and so on and so forth. They are supporting us. I'm speaking about Home Office, Foreign Office, and so on and so forth. And it's good to have all of the stakeholders cross one table. But again, I don't believe that we have judge ICC or Ukrainian prosecutor office, because they are stakeholders, from the same box. But only Ukrainian jurisdiction can develop all this huge number of cases, and only ICC has jurisdiction on international level. For sure, they have to play in the same game, in the same team for the same positive results. I'm not sure about Russian NGOs which are helping Ukrainian children. I heard about few cases, but we are speaking about tens of thousands. And what I see as potential solution to think about diplomatic track in Russia, because Ukraine doesn't have, ambassador. We don't have open tracks for negotiation. We don't have even potential possibility to back Ukrainians from Russia without some transitional history, like without mediators, or those from abroad who can be present in Russia physically will have a mandate from their governments or political level and will be negotiable with Russians. So, and we know about few cases, but it's not enough. You know that according to official statistician, more than 20,000 of Ukrainian children were kidnapped. And because of Russian president is so selfish and so confident about his future, he decided to testify about the crimes against Ukrainian children publicly in media. That's why Lvova Belova and he personally got this warrant from ICC. So we have to be honest that justice has different puzzles. So it's about global or international jurisdiction, it's about Ukrainian jurisdiction, and it's about each country which accepted the responsibility to be a part of core team to investigate the war crimes on their territories and to exchange this database and information in between different partners. Another question, it's about high-level trial against high-level politicians in Russia. And unfortunately, there are too many obstacles for having this trial very soon. And unfortunately, it's about G7 countries, which not all of them are ready to establish the trial. We hope that EU or Council of Europe will be a part of multilateral or bilateral agreements about establishing this type of trial. But you know that there is some legal problematic side for having it. At the same time, we believe that after the Second World War, it was creative decision. So, and it was about political will and political will to have justice against those who started huge war in Europe and not only in Europe. So what we are calling about to have trial, to have effective process on ICC level and to have effective investigations in Ukraine. And unfortunately, after the second year anniversary, after the full-scale invasion, we see that there is a huge request from Ukrainians victims to see first success cases in a court. Ukrainian judges are overloaded with all of these regular and war crimes cases. At the same time, we need to help them to have effectiveness.
Thank you. Yeah. Also, if I may, you know, Oля mentioned this international law dimension, but you also asked whether it has some effect on the work that we are doing. And I think that, yes, it definitely has when we're speaking about this human dimension, you know, because the victims and eyewitnesses that we have been interviewing in Warsaw and also other cities in Poland, you know, they're all looking for some hope. And the question they're asking our lawyers and psychologists who are doing the interviews is that, how long will it take? You know, will my children see some results of me providing these testimonies? And of course, you know, like we're also doing some awareness raising campaigns, and people do understand that it will take years and years to hold Russia accountable. But I think, you know, when this warrant for Putin and Lvova Belova came, so basically people at least get some example of how it might look like. Of course, you know, it doesn't have some, you know, very direct impact on them, but at least this is some small steps towards some justice in a very small field, but, you know, it also gives this light for hope or something.
Yeah, thank you. And that's also the reason why documenting war crimes is so important. Documenting as many crimes as possible. Yes, I think that we all realize that not every testimony, not every questionnaire filled by a witness will make it to the court. And organizations that are collecting testimonies must be absolutely transparent with the witnesses about it. However, continuing documenting from the refugees, documenting inside of Ukraine is of tremendous importance, because this is how the cases are built, and this also gives hope.
Mhm.
Thank you for the questions. Please go ahead.
I've got 2 questions, if that's okay. My first question is there any lessons that we can learn from the fall of Nazi Germany and the denazification process about how you deprogram children who have been exposed to fascist propaganda, because that's essentially what's happening again. In terms of the kidnapping and trafficking of children, what's the role of the Russian Orthodox Church in that? Because I've kind of picked up that they're quite heavily involved.
Thank you for the questions. Oля, would you like to? Yeah, the role of Russian Orthodox Church in the kidnapping and trafficking of Ukrainian children.
We didn't find, ми не можемо сказати, що є роль Російської православної церкви саме у викраденні дітей. Немає фактів, які би свідчили про це. Can somebody translate?
Yeah, I'll translate, no worries. So I don't have the evidence of the engagement of the Russian Orthodox Church in the cases of the kidnapping of Ukrainian children.
Але ми знаємо, що дітей викрадають в основному із притулків дитячих і перевозять в Росію і роздають їх в прийомні родини. І зважаючи на це, перед міжнародне правосуддя завжди діє в кращих інтересах дитини.
But what we are aware of is that Ukrainian children are mostly kidnapped from the shelters or the orphanages, and then the international justice acts in the interest of a child.
І тому дуже важко повернути зараз дітей в Україну, тому що вони були сиротами, а там вони якби мають прийомні родини, хоча ці родини потім відправляють їх на війну, коли вони підростають. І тому українських дітей зараз повернути важко. І
Well, that's the reason. Well, this is one of the arguments or reasons why it is so hard to return the Ukrainian children from kidnapped Ukrainian children back to Ukraine, as the argument is being made that they are there in safety, and when they are in Ukraine, actually they were not safe, and they were orphans. However, there they have the foster families and they have the future, and then when they grow up, they actually will be conscribed to the Russian army.
І на останній доповіді уповноваженого омбудсмена по захисту прав дитини звучала така думка, що варто в Україні було би зробити такий відкритий список, куди би люди могли вносити себе для того, щоб потім стати прийомними родинами або опікунами для цих дітей, які будуть повертатися. І в них тоді будуть кращі умови, і ми зможемо їх повернути.
And in the last report by the ombudsman of Ukraine, there was an idea to create a database of the potential foster parents who would be willing to accept the returned children into the families, and by doing so, Ukraine will build a case that that Ukrainian children, the return of the Ukrainian children, and in Ukraine they will get the better life conditions than they are having, as opposed to they are having in Russia.
І хто точно допомагав викрадати наших дітей, як ми бачимо в різних фільмах, в розслідуваннях, це викладачі, це працівники медичної сфери і це працівники соціальних служб.
So the evidence that we have who actually was engaged in this process were the social workers, the teachers, and the workers of the medical sphere. Well, on the church, maybe I can add, like your question on the Russian Orthodox Church, I think that the harm that, like, Russia is supposed to be a secure state, right? But here, what is, like, everyone sees is that church is part of the state, yeah? Which means that church is part of the propaganda, is Russian propaganda machine. So one way or the other, whether you cannot separate the church from the government propaganda, including on the topic of the kidnapping of Ukrainian children. And here I also like to separate the trafficking and the kidnapping, because the trafficking is something that is a very dramatic issue. Not only when the children are being, we don't have that information if they're being trafficked for labor exploitation, for sex exploitation on the territory of Russia. However, what the international, even in the EU, when the unaccompanied children, in the first year, I think that the statistics was that 3,000 Ukrainian children crossed the border with the EU unaccompanied. Yeah. Sometimes, because of the lack of the protection mechanism, specifically related to the trafficking, there is no evidence, and there was only research later, when after the fact that the government, particularly Polish government, realized that, oh, we have a problem, because there are such high risks for Ukrainian children, Ukrainian women to be exposed to traffickers. There was lack of awareness campaigns, and only after multiple groups were created on social media advocating or offering services to the Ukrainian women, Ukrainian children to be taken to the luxurious villas in Italy. And this is all real stuff, because I actually got, I didn't become a victim, but I actually posted because I was looking for a driver to take the refugees from the border, and I got a response on social media. Well, is this a pretty woman, and how old is she? So this was a reality, and the lack of awareness campaign, the lack of protection mechanisms created a problem that we really don't know. Whether women, children, men were trafficked and became the victims of the labor exploitation or sexual exploitation, or were trafficked for these purposes. So I think that these are the two separate issues. They are very important both, but there are different mechanisms of how they need to be addressed. Someone would like to add? There was also a question of denazification after the Second World War, and whether the lessons can be learned from the Nazi Germany.
You know that Putin used this denazification wording about Ukraine when he started full-scale invasion. That's why we don't like it, for sure. Ukrainians are patriotic, but it's not about Nazism. And it's funny that it's still narratives which people are using. I'm not about you, but about those who try to somehow not judge the Putin or Russia, what is happening in Ukraine now. At the same time, I mentioned already this manifesto of sustainable peace, which was produced by a group of authors, think tankers in Ukraine, and what we propose to think about that future Russia will happen. And we need to be ready to propose agenda for Russian society, for Russian elites, and we have to start to think about that now and to act on this track. I'm totally against the ideas of some groups to sit together, like Russian NGOs, Ukrainian NGOs, and to think about future, because now it's not a time when everyone are, fighting in Ukraine, and we are looking on Russian society, which is inactive even abroad, when they are not in insecurity frame. They can be active, but we don't see anything from their side. Even when Navalny was killed, one of political prisoner, we don't see the huge manifestation in London, in Berlin, in Paris. Why not? They can be visible, they can produce their statement, they can react somehow in a very secure frame abroad. But this history about future is very important for sure. We already proposed the agenda. First of all, they have to step back on the legislation level from their aggressive policies. When Putin will collapse, it will happen for sure, and I hope the KGB system will collapse too. The leaders, which will name themselves as opposition leaders, have to think how to step back from their constitution. They have to reload the constitution, because it's about social agreement, and they have 4 oblasts of Ukraine in the constitution. They have Crimea in the constitution, and it will be a big problem and issue for the future generation of Russian politicians, because they will not want to be unpopular. At the same time, they have to fight on the right side if they want to back to the European civilization route. So cut these oblasts and Crimea from the constitution, exclude from their social agreement. It will be one of the first priority, I believe so. If these people will be ready to step back from this problem, they will be ready to continue to negotiate with the neighbors about future sustainable peace. These people have to take responsibility about reparations. Each taxpayer in Russia have to pay for the damage which already has happened and unfortunately will happen during next years. Many people lost everything. You may saw the photos from Avdiivka, Bakhmut and other cities. Now it's ghost cities. There is no there anything, destroy everything. You can find even tree without damage. So these cities was destroyed to 0 point. And the people which left their homes, maybe they're in Ukraine or abroad, have to have reparations because they lost everything because of this aggression. And this is a type of punishment of Russian nation. So reparations is financial responsibility of each of taxpayer in Russia, and this nation has to accept this. They need to change their military doctrine, because if NATO, Ukraine, and other neighbors will be like potential source of the insecurity for Russia, they will be always under the potential attack from Russian side. So exclude these type of objectives from their military doctrine will help us to understand that these political leaders potentially will be ready to build sustainable peace, not just to be after the Putin and to accept the power and then to increase the same issue for the neighbors as Putin did. You know that Obama believed that Russia can be a part of civilization, Western civilization, but it was a mistake and we have to accept that. And this is not just about Putin for sure. Russian society, unfortunately, support this aggression. And we have to understand that without not this denationalization, but without exception, this different type of responsibility, nothing will change. I already, not here, but used many times this argue, but my son is a fourth generation which are suffering because of Moscow. My grandmother and grandfather were political prisoners in USSR. USSR used the same methodology against Ukraine, against Ukrainian children, against Ukrainian identity as Russia is using now. Nothing changed. Putin wasn't born on that century or that period, but unfortunately they are using the same methodology. So sustainable peace, it's about forgiveness. But I don't believe that next generation of Ukrainian children will forgive or forget what's happening now. And even those children which are not eyewitnesses of the war are suffering because they are listening on the daily basis information about dead people, destroyed villages and cities in Ukraine, and potential damage for their relatives. 3 men in my family are fighting as soldiers now, military, and they didn't have such experience 2 years ago. So, you know, it's unacceptable. I believe that in a future perspective, Russia will be free, but they have to pay price, accept responsibility, and then to be negotiable for developed countries. Japanese is very good example. Japanese did awful things as empire during Second World War. but now it's one of the most sustainable partner. Japanese government paid $4.5 billion to Ukrainian budget just for help Ukraine to survive this month. And this is very, very responsible. So that's why there is a hope. Russia hopes so will be free, but this nation has to accept responsibility. And then it will be negotiable for the future perspective.
Thank you. We will take a question in the back and then a question from the front. And then I will acknowledge you.
Yes, thank you for raising this very important awareness about this situation with children. I have a personal question because I'm a displaced Ukrainian with a child, and most of the Ukrainian refugees are mothers with children. I want to know how legally children are protected in case if mother dies outside of Ukraine, and if there is no other relatives, no other family. For example, I'm here, just me and my daughter. My family in Ukraine, they don't have UK visa, so no one actually can physically come if something happens to me. There are so many moms who have more than one child. Do you know any cases for the past 2 years with Ukrainian refugees in this situation? What happens with children?
No, I think that I'm looking at the colleagues. I think that this is a very important issue. However, it's more of a question to the Home Office and the maybe consulate services of the embassy, because the protection in every country and in UK is not part of the EU. Yeah, the directive of the EU doesn't apply here. So I'm afraid that we will not be able to answer that legal question to you. I'm sorry.
But the reason why I ask this question to raise awareness
Yes.
about this as well, because otherwise there will be orphanages.
You're absolutely right.
Beyond the country,
Yeah.
while we're trying to bring back Ukrainian children from Russia, there could be Ukrainian children
In the
also
third
abroad
countries.
in other
Yeah,
countries.
no, you're absolutely right. It's an important question. I'm afraid we will not be able to provide answer, but it would be really worth turning to the embassy of Ukraine.
Consulate.
Yeah, or the consulate, exactly, consulate.
We don't have a local legal expertise, unfortunately, but what I can do recommend, according to our statistical information, not all Ukrainians who are living abroad have connection with the embassy. It's about consulate registration. Our embassies and Ministry of Foreign Affairs has like 700,000 or even less people who apply to be part of this register. If you are scaring what may happen with your child, you have to be in this register. Our embassy will know about you and your child. If not, it's very difficult to.
I'm not a part of the Ukrainian embassy, unfortunately, but it is a bit complicated process. At least in this country, at least in the UK case, there's a long queue on the consulate services. So even the people who want to get registered have to apply for electronic queue and wait months or ages.
But this issue also needs to be raised with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and honestly, we can do it. We can deliver the message. That's for sure.
The first message should be, where is ambassador?
We always highlight, not always, but it's not just about UK. It's about few other countries which are very important for Ukraine.
Every single person responsible for current situation in Ukraine keep calling UK as a main international partner. And does Ukraine can afford? Don't have ambassador for such a help.
Yeah. I guess this will be another message, and this has been raised consistently, and not only inside of the UK, because there are also other locations where there are no highest levels of representation of the Ukrainian diplomacy present, and we can only agree with you that this needs to be addressed. But thank you. And well, there was a question, and then there was another one, and then Maria, I also saw your hand. Please go ahead.
I'm not sure to whom to address this question, but it's a question about education of children in the occupied territories.
Yeah.
We know that under communism, there were secret universities and secret schools in Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Poland, which came under a lot of pressure, a lot of persecution, even physical attacks of those who both attended those schools and were teaching in them. Are there any such schools in the occupied territories countering the dogma that they're being fed by Russia, whether that be at a higher level, the university level, because there were, under communism, this was where it was most active at that level, but there were also some schools, as there were in Kosovo in the 90s. So is there any kind of network or schooling going on which is countering the kind of ideology that they're being fed by the Russian occupiers?
Can I propose Veronica to answer this question, because she was under occupation?
Can you say something like what is secret schools or universities? Because in occupation we have like this is just schools who in occupied territories. It works like people from occupational Russian government. They go with people with guns to schools, to Ukrainian schools there, or Ukrainian universities. We had 2 universities who changed their programs in my city, and some amount of schools, and they sometimes change people there. They provide their teachers from Russia to go and teach Ukrainian kids about history, language, because they don't have like that Ukrainian teachers would say exactly what they wrote on their books, and this is just changed schools. This is not work from the zero. They use people who want to collaborate, and the most sad thing for me that some people are forced to work there to say things that they would never expect from themselves to do, but they economically forced because, for example, for many people they don't have enough money to live there and live to escape from occupation, and they need to do, and that schools they use lots of propaganda to create just that Russian identity, as you mentioned, and it's also about universities, but in my experience they try to concentrate on different audiences with different messages. For example, for older ones, it's not more propaganda. This is another one, and it's hard to describe all of the things that happen. But I believe that I mentioned some points of that system. If you can to add, yeah.
Can I add, because you mentioned something really important yesterday, which I think answers your question. What Veronica was doing when she was in occupation, she stayed connected online with the outside world, with the Ukrainian in unoccupied territories, including as related to the education, not only kind of friends, but also, engaging in educational activities. And she received a message from an unknown person saying, I know that you stay connected, I know that you have a pro-Ukrainian position, you need to be careful. So it was a kind of a kind, well-wishing message. And she thought that, okay, well, if someone who is a kind person, maybe a supporter, knows that I stay engaged to seek alternative sources of education, then who else knows? Mm-hmm. I had a friend living in Kherson in occupation. She was doing the video diary. But the first thing what happened is that the internet was shut down. And she was sending me the photos where people were standing next to the stands, the internet stands, with the phones up, so that they can find out what is happening outside of Kherson, actually, and whether the Ukrainian army is coming and is going to liberate the city. And then she was a civic activist. She actually was involved with a political party, and she was stopped on the street. She was just rushing, to buy some bread and then going because she was afraid that someone would stop her, and she was stopped on the street. And it was the Russian police or the military, and they said that they had her photo, so they knew that she is a civic activist, and she got a warrant. After that, she decided that she needs to escape to Odessa. Typically, a road to Odessa from Kherson would be just a few hours. It took her 46 hours. 46 hours, including being shoved off the road, strip search, and all other awful things that the Russian army did to her. She made it to Odessa. She then went to the Navy, and now she's serving in the Navy. So that's, how, people engaged in the alternative information. So I'm not personally aware of the secret underground universities, but I'm aware, and I think that my colleagues as well, of many cases where people were staying connected online just to ensure that they have a little bit of hope of escaping this indoctrination.
Can I
Yeah.
add something? And they, of course, not only institutions, schools, universities, but also those kids and youth students who would be students that they need to go to that places. And for example, if they're kids, they can say for their parents that they would have some problems with parental rights. Their children, if they would not go to that school, they would send them into Russian territory to another family, and families are in panic what to do, and it's really hard for them to have the decision, as me, for example, to be online with my Ukrainian education. It was not just a decision that we made. Oh, okay, we would not go. Like me and my friends, we would stay with Ukrainian education. It is a hard decision for all the kids who experienced occupation, and you don't really know who is near you, as you mentioned. That
Who's your friend?
Who is your friend? Who is your teacher? Would your teacher, if you go to, for example, this school that opened with Russian education, would not they send you to some camp, and they just send you to another place where your parents would not know where are you? That happened with my friend. She went to that school because her family said that they don't want to risk about parental rights, and they had some like traveling, and then her parents didn't even know where is she, how to bring her away from this place, what is with her, and this is also it's not only mentally and just identity unsafe thing that schools and universities, and this is also physically unsafe places.
Thank you. Thank you, Veronica. We have 5 more minutes. Yeah, but if our kind host would allow us, we will take the question. And if you, Ira, would you like to add something to that?
No, I just want to conclude that, you know, the fact that we are not aware of any secret networks doesn't mean that they do not exist. And this is exactly, you know, we also have the example of Crimea and Crimean Tatars, you know, who are still active under occupation. And we did have many examples of Ukrainians on the occupied territories, also from Kherson, you know, journalists and civil activists who informed Ukrainian army forces and the secret service about the Russian military and how the troops stood on the territory. So, but indeed, if we speaking about the official track, the university, they are now in exile, and Donetsk National University, for instance, they had to move, and they are working from exile in Vinnytsia right now.
Yeah. So thank you. We will take the last question.
He actually stole my question.
Oh,
It's a little bit wider than that. It wasn't just on education, but just were there spaces available in the occupied territory of the Donbass region where you felt, you know, you can practice and enjoy your cultural areas. And on that, I was also wondering about the film itself, because working with children, I assume that wasn't in the occupied regions, whether NGOs have the space to go in there and to work with children or with others, just in terms of the security and what space is available to you not.
thank you. So, Olga,
Чи діти, які були в окупації, знімалися фільми, як і чи є громадські
One girl was
організації?
from occupation. Her name is Sofia. She is from Energodar, and her parents worked on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear station. And his uncle was kidnapped by Russians, and they didn't know where he is now. And now she and her parents went to Norway, and they are in safety. But all these 2 months she worked with us online, and it was not safety. It was dangerous for her, because when Russians saw something in your phone, even our flag or even some chat about Ukraine, or like know about this, they can kill you and kill your family. So now she is safe.
yeah, indeed, no, educational system is of incredible importance also for the documentation of war crimes, because this is where we learn and can make stronger links between the genocidal nature and the impact of future generation and the war crimes conducted on the territory of Ukraine. Yeah. So we have one more question. I'm looking at our kind host. If we can take the
Yes, of course.
okay. This will be the last.
While I'm speaking, just to remind everybody, we have this QR code over there, and if you want to support the work of Voices of Children by sending your donations, that's the way to do it. And also, this discussion is being recorded, and we'll post it on our YouTube channel, so please share it. Please continue to raise awareness.
Thank you so much, and you have the honor of the last question.
I've got a question about Ukrainian children who ended up outside of Ukraine in other countries like Poland, and they have been educated in Polish schools under Polish educational system in Polish language. What efforts are being made to help them retain their Ukrainian identity? Are there any plans for introducing Ukrainian schools in those countries, or maybe Ukrainian classes in Polish schools, especially that the Polish government changed?
Yeah, thank you for this question. I can relate to the experience of living in Poland and share that out of 3 children that are based in Poland, 2 continue online education in Ukrainian schools. So out of this is huge. So they continue the online education without going to the Polish schools. In terms of the presence of the Ukrainian schools, there is a Ukrainian school. There is a weekend Ukrainian school that has been active in Poland for quite some time. It's based in Warsaw, and there is another Ukrainian school also opened in Warsaw that is supported by the international donors, where the Ukrainian children are accepted. There are also Ukrainian schools on the commercial basis and also kindergarten. The organization like Study UA, and this is not the advertisement, just mentioning it for the statistics, they've opened the boarding school. Well, this is a school for Ukrainian children where they are accepted on the basis of their Ukrainian certificates received from the Ukrainian schools. And also the possibility of having full board, basically, where children stay and live if their parents have to be in Ukraine. There are other initiatives as well. There are NGOs who are active and trying to provide that education. This is Warsaw. In Wrocław, for instance, another biggest city, the community is 250,000. And the children go to the Polish schools, and when they go to the Polish schools, of course, they study on the Polish curriculum. So I think that this is not ideal, but what I've been observing personally is that there are a lot of efforts of the diaspora in Poland, and also the support of the international donors to really make the Ukrainian education available without this online mechanism or online element. However, many mothers who brought their children to Poland, they opt for the online education. Anyone would like to add to this?
It was important question about long war or endless war, because if our children will live abroad for a longer period, each government, each country wants to have reintegration of these human resources. And this is huge damage for Ukrainians, for sure, as a nation. It doesn't mean that this government is doing something against the rational, agenda or policies, but the reality is like that. So that's why it's highly important to have Ukrainian studies, not just Sunday or Saturday meetings of the children organized by small communities, but to have Ukrainian school abroad, for sure. But I hope that there is only one rational solution for that. Not I hope, I know that there is only one rational solution. To protect Ukraine, for having security or predictability about security for Ukrainian cities. And as I mentioned already, so we have examples. Just compare last winter and last May in Kyiv. This is a reality, or we'll lose a generation.
Thank you very much for being here. We will conclude this discussion, and we are incredibly thankful for your time, for listening, for being here, and for taking action. And since we're here in London, just probably would be good to mention what Churchill said once: never, never, never give up. So let's not give up together, and again, we are very thankful for you being here. Thank you.